I'm Bob Hallmark in Longview today at the Longview Animal Care and Adoption Center, and we're talking not about adoption and cats and dogs here, but about wildlife. And that's what brings me here to talk to the center director. And this is Chris Kemper, who we have talked to many times before.
Yep.
Chris, we normally in the summertime, especially when it dries out, and when it gets hot and little streams and puddles kind of disappear, we very often have a problem with wildlife encounters with people that maybe live in residential areas. Now, this usually happens earlier in summer when we have droughts and things of that nature. However, because of all of our rain during June and earlier months, that has not been a problem. We are just now approaching this now. What as far as animal behavior, you say that heat and dryness actually do change animals' behavior sometimes.
Absolutely. What happens is it changes animals' typical patterns of when they move around, when they come out, when they're active. Animals that are typically nocturnal may be coming out during the daytime. They're coming out whenever they need to find the resources that are required for them to have food, to have water. And if that oftentimes leads to people coming into contact with wildlife because they're coming out and they're in areas that they wouldn't normally be at, and times they wouldn't normally be there. And we always encourage people to be careful during this time of year so that they don't put themselves in a position to have an encounter with something that they're not expecting to have an encounter with.
Now, we've done this story many times before, and as we have seen, sometimes wildlife can encroach even upon residential areas looking for things like food, like water. And there's some caution that people need to take if they do run into something like a coyote, a raccoon, even snakes, things of that nature. They need to be very careful about not trying to interact with these animals.
Absolutely. The big thing is give them a wide berth. Stay away from them. Don't try to feed them. Don't try to offer them resources. Don't do things that are going to encourage them to come in contact with you and then stay in the area where you're at. This can put people at risk. This can put pets at risk. And this can cause issues on your property where animals take up residence, whether they get in your attic area, where they get in the underneath side of your house, where they're coming up on your porch and getting into your pet's food or water, especially if that's being left out at times. These animals are active.
Mm-hmm. And that's the big thing is don't leave resources out for them to find. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Don't leave resources out. We encourage people, once you feed your pets, pull that food up. Don't store it in outside areas. Don't store it in open garages. Don't store it in areas where those animals can come into it, because if you're storing food in a garage area and you have animals that are coming into it and then you come into that garage area, you may startle them and you may have an encounter that you don't mean to have and that the animal doesn't want to have either. So just taking small precautionary steps can avoid most of that.
One of the things particularly that you should pay attention to here is they are wild animals. These are not domesticated. They should not be viewed as animals that you can just carelessly feed and take care of, because as you said, that's an invitation for them to stick around.
Absolutely, which is what you don't want them to do. And on the other hand, what we remind people when we get a lot of calls this time of year about seeing animals out at abnormal times where you wouldn't normally see them, that doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with them. It doesn't mean they're sick. We used to have people tell us, I saw this coyote or I saw this raccoon out, during the day, which means they have rabies. Well, that typically does not mean they have rabies. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It just means, like the rest of us, they're out looking for water. They're looking for food. It's harder to find this time of year, so they're just more likely to be in a spot where somebody might see them. And just because you see them, nothing wrong with that. Just leave them alone. Don't try to approach them. Don't try to pet them. Certainly don't try to make a pet out of them. And as long as you follow those simple guidelines, then most people aren't going to have any problem. The wildlife does not want to interact with us. We see more snakes this time of year. The vast majority of our snakes are non-venomous and non-problematic. Most of the wildlife that we have here isn't going to cause anybody any problems as long as you don't try to feed them, don't leave food out for them, don't give them shelter, don't give them a place where they can live, near where, your house is. Don't give them access under your house. Don't give them access into your attic area, things like that.
Okay. Now, in years past, I know that it falls upon the auspices of animal control sometimes to take care of these things when people do report having a wild animal or any kind of wildlife hanging around, their home or even getting inside their home. And you guys have had some experience with this in the past. You've had to remove, I guess, some very unusual things sometimes from people's homes.
Yeah, we do. There are times when we do a lot of removal, a lot of relocating. Probably the biggest thing we do is just education, though,
Mm-hmm.
and helping people understand that if you do certain things, we can live with the wildlife we have. One of the greatest things about East Texas is we have a vast amount of wildlife that lives in and around us, and most of the time won't cause any problems. And we want that wildlife there. It's one of the great things about here. We just don't want any interactions. So we educate people. We help them put themselves in a position where they're not going to have those encounters. And when we do have those accidental animals that end up in places they're not supposed to be, we do help remove them and get them back to where they are supposed to be and help change that environment so that they don't come back.
All right. Chris Kemper, thank you so much.
Absolutely, Bob.
Appreciate it. All right, and we'll have much more on this story on KLTV 7 News for KLTV Web Extra. I'm Bob Holmark.